I actually think bucket lists are life-delaying lists in disguise because it gives us just enough satisfaction. I'm fanatical about looking at my calendar as a litmus test for my happiness to come. I look at all the pockets of my week, right? And if I have a sense of, you know, the difference, right? Some things you look at and there's like a bit of dread, and some things you look at and they're just so energizing, or, you know, oh, I'm going to take this 2 hours and I'm going to build a new workshop that I'm going to get to deliver for this client in a month. And it's going to be like paying attention to the stuff that energizes versus de-energizes versus like, please somebody stab me in the face so that I don't have to do this thing. That's been super helpful, is like, oh, we have more control over our calendar, our time than we think. And so really, quite frankly, getting ahead of that and saying, how do I design my weeks, which really just adds up to a life, so that there's much more of the stuff that's really great and way less if possible. I mean, you know, at some point we still have to do administrative stupid stuff, or we have to do stuff we don't love, but how can I dial that down?
Okay, Jodi, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm excited to be here with you. Thank you.
In your book, there's a quote from Irvin Yalom. It says, though the physicality of death may destroy us, the idea of death may save us, or something along those lines. So what do you think Yalom meant when he said this?
Okay, first of all, thank you for picking out one of my very favorite quotes in the book right off the start, because that is, he's one of my idols. You know, he's an existential psychologist, and he's one of the guys that woke me up to this whole idea that death, while certainly crappy, doesn't have to be an entirely dour thing. It can be the thing where if we pay attention to it and contemplate it and use it as a reminder that we're temporary, that is the very animating thing that can wake us up to live like we mean it, so that we don't end up squandering our days, or because it's easier not to think about death or talk about it. But when we do, it helps us see our time as more precious, doesn't it?
For sure, for sure. So can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the benefits you've found? Because you've studied this scientifically through I think you did your master's in this as well, your thesis and all. Can you tell us about the benefits of contemplating death and this idea of temporal scarcity as well?
Ooh, okay, thank you. Well, temporal scarcity kind of leads us in, because it's this concept that, you know, we value things that are rare. We just kind of know this to be true based on, you know, diamonds and stock markets and such. But when we look at life, for example, as it's an asset we have, as limited time only, that activates this sense of scarcity, which normally, by the way, in the world of self-development, self-help, you know, even positive psychology, normally we're not looking to find scarcity. We like abundance better, but this is where scarcity helps, is because it does help us to really size the prize. And when it's a backwards countdown, which this puppy is, this life we got to live, we become more attuned to the fact that, oh, we're totally finite. And now I know I need to make something of this time, rather than just keep delaying it and doing it later. And so when we do this, the good news for, you know, most of us, initially it feels a little bit uncomfortable for some people, you know, to be thinking about the fact that, well, this party will end. And then for the rest of us, you know, I encourage us to count how many Mondays we have left, for example. And that can be a bit eye-opening and a little bit uncomfortable, but it's discomfort designed for a reason. It's not to create panic and that sense of anxiety that I don't have enough time left, but it's about, wow, I need the reminder. I need to see that this is going to end, and in this potential time frame. And now, in light of it, what do I want to do? So for many of us, it activates motivational tendencies. For many of us, ironically, it alleviates anxiety about death. It's kind of funny. It's like, I don't want to think about death because it gives me the heebie-jeebies. But what if you actually thought a little more about it? Because then that might be the thing that activates you to live. And research is clear that for most of us who have really felt like we've participated in our lives, our fear of death tends to be ameliorated because we feel like, well, you know what, whatever, I got to go. I've lived a good life. So there's a bunch of relationships there, and I'll pause because otherwise I get all excited about this stuff.
One of the things you talk about in the book, and I think everybody does this, I certainly do it, we all carry an unconscious belief that everybody else is going to die, but I'll be all right, you know, which is just so ridiculous, like, but we do it, you know?
Yeah.
But something, you know, you hear these stories of people that have these near-death experiences and they almost die, whether in a
Mm,
car accident or they maybe have a brush with cancer or whatever. And then they come out of the other side and they totally transform their lives. They're a totally
mm,
different person. They see what's important. They might leave
mhm.
a job, leave a relationship, and just start fresh. And there seems to be benefits of near-death experiences, but what you're really getting at with your book, Jodi, is that you're sort of saying we can get these benefits without nearly dying, And
Oh,
do you think that's possible? Have you seen that in the people you've worked with? Like, is how much can we do this?
yeah. I love that you're bringing this up because you've gone to the ultimate scenario that for those, some people, not everybody who's had a brush with death is now all of a sudden like living this majestic life that everyone, wow, good for you. You're really living plugged in. But that is true statistically. Most people who have had that wake up call, they now live on purpose to a greater extent. And I am so envious of them because even though I study this stuff and I talk about it, there's a very pure sense of sanctity that they have of like, I almost lost this life. And now I know what matters, what doesn't matter. So I'm going to focus on those things. I'm going to ditch those things. So they've got this sense of like, I'm going to start the business, or I'm going to apply for school, or I'm going to move to London, or I'm going to whatever, fill in the blanks. For the rest of us, though, all we can hope for is to get close to a whiff of that, I think. And I do think that that's why, for example, like my book, and, obviously I would encourage everybody to reread it monthly. Ha ha ha. But it's like a reminder that we do need in order to get close to that idea. So for the rest of us who are walking around taking our lives for granted, because it's the normal thing to do, I do encourage, in addition to contemplating death and counting Mondays, I encourage to think about a friend maybe who almost had a car accident and died, or almost had a breast cancer and almost died, or maybe they even did die. But imagine that you had a brush with death and that you came home from the hospital, or sorry, as you say, you came home from hospital. You don't say the hospital there, do you? You came home and you got to be at home and you said, I get to be here. I almost died in this sort of fantasy visualization, but I didn't. I came out of the coma. And now I want us to look around it. I'm looking right now at my desk and like I've got a to-do list on a sticky note. I'm looking at these things. And if I had the perspective of coming out alive home from the hospital today, I'd look at this and go, oh, that stupid thing doesn't matter. That bullet point doesn't matter. What matters is this. So how can we look through our lives with fresh eyes and do that kind of regularly? I think it takes a regular reminder about what is important. Are we going to get to the end with regrets? Those kinds of things.
What brought you to this, Jodi? I
Mm.
think in your book you mentioned about you were cleaning your mother passed, which I'm really sorry to hear. But you were cleaning out her house and you found some things, and that was maybe
Yeah,
a trigger for this.
totally was. Like I've always been interested in the notion that we are all terminal. Like it just seems so bizarre to me, where we work hard to like our lives and then all of a sudden it's just going to end at a time we don't know. I mean, that just is bizarre for somebody who likes control, like me. I just find it amazing that it's the ultimate mystery anyway. But yes, more importantly, my mom died when she was in her late 50s. She had a heart attack. And my experience of cleaning out her place was just so unexpectedly jarring. And it wasn't because I was grieving, that was true too, but it was because she had all these remnants of her plans, her goals, and these like business objectives. She had written manuscripts and stuff, and she had like business ideas, business cards she had made for all these ideas. And she didn't really execute on any of them because she didn't have the confidence. And it really shook me because I recognized that I have the tendency to sometimes dream and not do for fear. It requires confidence. Sometimes you can't buy. And it made me realize not only is life short, like unexpectedly, you could die at 58, you could die at 108, but you could also die at 28. That was one thing, of course, but it was more that, oh my God, I do not want to get to the end and feel like I have a desk full of ideas and dreams that I did not take action on.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned there about you know, sort of having all these like dreams and ideas, and you're not actually actualizing them.
Hmm.
I heard you speak with Chase Jarvis in another interview, and you mentioned in that he or there's actually a real danger to having positive fantasies and visualizing all the time without actually taking action. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this is one of the most bizarre things. I remember, so you alluded earlier, like I did my master's in applied positive psychology, and that's where I decided to study this topic of mortality as a motivator. And I remember the night I was reading a study or research by Gabrielle Oettingen, and she talks about this concept. She does this whole concept called WHOOP, and it's an acronym that I won't bother to go into. But if you want to look, just Google WHOOP, and you'll be like, you'll be busy for hours. But she does talk about this idea about positive fantasies, how sometimes we dupe ourselves. And I find this alarming. I do this all the time. Okay. Tell me if you do. You might think about an idea about a plan you have. It could be like a small or medium goal, or it could even be about a thing as simple as like, oh, I want to reach out and thank that friend for hosting that really amazing dinner last night. And I will like imagine how I'm going to word this, warm and funny email to my friend. And then you feel somehow, or you imagine the dream about, oh, I am going to finish that painting. And it's going to feel so good and you get just enough of that heady glow and the good feeling. Oh, and then you put it aside because you're busy and you've got an appointment at 8 o'clock and you go about your life and you've had just enough of like a pseudo satisfaction of imagining the goal that it actually takes the steam out of taking action on it, which is the whole freaking point, right? Like, good to know that my really nicely composed email to my friend is stuck in my head and they have no idea that I wrote it or meant it, right? Good idea that my painting is going to just sit fantasized in my mind about I was going to use that color of blue if the canvas is sitting there looking at me like, hello. So it is like there's almost like a danger zone about dreaming about our ideas, which is weird because many of us are taught to, think positive, visualize success. We just have to do a little more legwork. And so all this stuff is like I talk about life is short. I have 1,810 Mondays. Okay, now I have the fuel to go, okay, I want to paint now. And I can't just stop and go, oh, it's going to be such a pretty painting. And then go ahead. I have to go, when am I going to paint? Okay, if I'm motivated to do this today at 4, I'm going to pull out the paintbrushes. Even though I'm afraid of it being a disaster and it's not going to look good right away. And I want to avoid, it's like committing to a time, which actually makes it a little more salient. Do you ever do that where you like start to fantasize and it gives you just enough satisfaction?
Oh, I used to do it all the time. I still do. And you can get a lot of kicks from like imagine all these things you do. Oh, I should do that and do that and do that, and it's very satisfying. But you never actually do anything, and then that ultimately is such a buzzkill, you know. Um,
Yeah.
what has your internal subjective experience of life been like before you started doing this kind of work and after? Like, what was the internal
Oh,
world of Jodi like before,
wow.
and what's it like now?
Wow. This is such a great question. You know, I have a conscious awareness so I've always been interested in self-development and, enjoying life. And I'm a generally zesty person. So I don't know if you're familiar with the VIA character strengths. It's one of the online most well researched, peer-reviewed, free character strength assessments online. So viacharacter.org, everybody should go. It's global. And zest is one of my number one strengths. So I've always been interested in, sucking the marrow out of the bone of life, so to speak. But I also have a little bit in my mind about before and after, where before, like the way I look at it is like I'm enjoying life generally. There's enough meaning, there's enough vitality, but I was sort of, I'm going to use these words on purpose. Like I was going with the flow of my life, and I sometimes that can be good because we want to rest and relax. And sometimes you're like, I'm just too hard. I can't paddle anymore. Or this flow is actually quite nice. I want to just, where's the ride going to take me? That's cool. But I feel like I was along for the ride. And then I feel like after really embracing more of this notion about carpe diem and not just in a make the most of every day, all of the fancy drinks and fun times, those are good too. But really it's about being deliberate and saying, wait a sec, this is a diminishing resource. Like when I did start doing the granular counting, when I did start researching more about how memento mori, which is that Latin phrase that means remember we must die, it's been around for centuries. When I did start taking it seriously and looking at it, I realized that as much as I like to think I enjoy life, I also know I need to be reminded to live. And I need to be reminded to do it with more intention. And because I will, back to my mom and my kind of default setting genetically, I might have a cool idea for something, but then it'll just kind of get buried or something else might be a priority. But I realized, am I doing justice to this time? Or am I going with the flow and getting caught up in busy work that maybe I've even been the one to create? Am I hanging out with people that are, fine, but you kind of just keep re-upping your monthly lunch because that's what we do. But am I really enjoying this time and like being thoughtful about how and who I'm spending my time with and what am I doing? And really am I making the most of my literal Mondays and Tuesdays and so on? So I feel like I've had the gift in a way, it's like a mini near death experience, but it's this sort of transformation of my life before, which was good and fine. Still some issues for sure, but like join the club. But more conscious, like, oh, this is, I got to be thoughtful about how I look at my calendar. And now here's one thing I do. I'm fanatical about looking at my calendar as a litmus test for my happiness to come. So I look at it and go, like, for example, my day here talking with you, you're the top of my day. And I was looking forward to this. So you're already like getting my day off, got to a good start. And I've got to, I look at my calls to come and my things I've got going on. And I do have a lunch, which is going to be nice. And it also is nice that I happen to have a happy hour planned for tonight, but that's beside the point. But I look at all the pockets of my week, right? And if I have a sense of, the difference, right? Some things you look at and there's like a bit of dread, and some things you look at and they're just so energizing, or, oh, I'm going to take this 2 hours and I'm going to build a new workshop that I'm going to get to deliver for this client in a month. And it's going to be like paying attention to the stuff that energizes versus de-energizes versus like, please, somebody stab me in the face so that I don't have to do this thing. That's been super helpful, is like, oh, we have more control over our calendar, our time than we think. And so really, quite frankly, getting ahead of that and saying, how do I design my weeks, which really just adds up to a life, so that there's much more of the stuff that's really great and way less if possible. I mean, at some point we still have to do administrative stupid stuff, or we have to do stuff we don't love, but how can I dial that down?
I love that, sort of using your you say using your calendar as a litmus test for your happiness. Like that's the best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's exactly how you're spending your time.
Yes.
How do you take this from an intellectual understanding to an
Mm-hmm.
emotional one? Because, intellectually, I'm okay with the fact that I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
But every so often, maybe really late at night or whatever, whenever that hits me, I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty shocking. So how do you
Yeah.
really get this to sink in?
Yeah. Well, you've already highlighted a distinction that's important, that because you've let it get to the emotional point, that is where good stuff can happen. And in the world of death studies, there's this concept called terror management theory, where it's a natural reaction for us when we do contemplate death to not feel so hot about it. And because we want to stay alive and we want to provide enduring value. So if you're making it emotional, you're already on a good track, because it feels like, oh, wait a minute. And maybe presumably the emotion has, can I ask you, like, when you think about it in this way, what is the stuff that is bubbling up that doesn't feel good? What is it? What is that about?
It's it's not that I'm consciously thinking about it. It's just it's a realization that hits me. It sort
Mm.
of gets past the conscious mind, and it's like, oh wow, you and everybody you know are going to be gone someday. And that to
Yeah.
me is like, it's so shocking because it's a big unknown.
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
shock probably a little bit.
Yeah. So it's this sort of, it sounds like it's existential in general for you and people, that almost like I said when I was growing up, that weird, like, well, this is absurd that poof, you'll be gone and they'll be gone. And yeah. Um, I encourage then more of a deeper reflection of, okay, what, analyze your feelings, like sit in them, like, oh, wow, it's so shock. And then is it like almost pre-grief? Is it a bit of fear? Is it a bit of sadness? And what is that about? Is it that I'm going to miss people, or they're going to miss me? Or is it that I'm going to get to my deathbed and feel like, oh, I never became a ski instructor and that was my big life dream, or whatever that is for you? I think that excavating that is always time well spent. And I recommend your beverage of choice, which, you could be a green juice or whatever. Yeah, I'm into margaritas lately. whatever helps you to be like, let me think about this. So I find it, not everyone's going to go to an existential therapist. I don't think you actually have to. Sorry to all of you existential therapists out there. I think you're great. That could be cool. I also think talking to friends about it is really valuable. Loved ones. People are like, hey, what do you think about this? I'm like, let's not dwell, though, very long in the morbid stuff, because that admittedly is a downer and it's off putting. We need just enough of a dose of it, though. Back to the practicality you were thinking about. Get in touch with it, count the time, think about it, and then consciously pivot to say, okay, well, how do I use this now to activate, maybe use a little bit of that panic or discomfort and say, okay, well, how, in light of that, what do I want to do about it? How do I want to spend my time? What would make me feel like I was making a choice to show up and live in a way that is actually kind of cool to me right now? And we're all in phases of life. So maybe for you right now, it's that for you, it's seizing the day with a bunch of friends and going on a road trip. Or maybe for someone else, that would not be their idea. It would be that they want to start a reading room in their community or a book club or reading to kids or something. There's no right answer. But I do think it's about consciously saying, wow, temporary, sucks. How much time? Ooh, interesting feelings. Mull that. And then say, okay, how do I want to? I'm not dead yet. So how do I want to still seize this and then get to the end and feel proud that I actually maxed it out? Again, max being relative to whatever that looks like for you, because it doesn't need to be like a whirlwind. That would actually, for me, sound terrible, but it could be whatever your version of a life well lived is.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point you make in the book that
Mm.
like, this isn't just about like overhauling everything and just sort of living the maximally meaningful life. It's your definition of what that is to you. And that might just be being in a very Zen state, or it might be gardening or whatever, whatever it is for you. Like, it's not like you have to do anything crazy.
Yeah. And, the more people that I meet with and talk to at different workshops, the more I'm realizing that that tends to be a bit of the preference. So there's a fantasy I think we have in spits and furts and starts, and like that we're going to get out there and have a whirlwind, vacation, or we're going to maybe do one cool, really big thing that sort of feels, wow, wild and crazy. And usually for most of us, those are moments that are anomalies that are fun, and that the rest of our lives is where life is getting lived. And it's through those seemingly mundane moments that we can wring the experience of life out of it and say, wait a sec, it is when I am sitting in my backyard and I'm just sitting in a quick break between emails, or maybe it is when I consciously decided that, we're going to look up a really fun recipe and make a neat dinner for Thursday night, which is usual from our boring routine. And that makes me feel so, wow, we did a fun thing. It doesn't have to take a lot of money or a lot of time, or now depending on the recipe. I mean, you might have just committed to something big, but that's up to you. Little things we can do actually go a long way. And it doesn't need to be, this like magnanimous life that you post on social media.
I think two of the most important benefits that people might get from your book are, the first is that, like you say, like this really can help you appreciate the mundane day-to-day
Mm,
life. Like just walking to the
mm,
supermarket, you'll just notice things differently. You'll just appreciate just the walk itself, because you realize that, you're in finite time here, and it really is precious. And the second thing is not just your own mortality, but when you realize that the people closest to you are going to die as well,
mm.
parents, whatever, like you really appreciate them. You're like, oh my God, like this might be one of the last times I see this person. So I'm really going to savor this time I have with them?
I love that you mentioned that. And in honesty, I feel like that's the next frontier of stuff I want to get more into, because I typically don't talk about others' deaths. For now, I've really only talked about you're going to die and what do you want to do about that? But I agree with you fully, and I'm dabbling in more research, because I'll be honest with you that it's complicated, because when other people die, now you've got the animal in the room known as grief, and that's very often unwieldy and it's tough, right? And so I would never want to overstep and be like, I know you're grieving. It's a bad day, but trust me, memento mori, like let's go seize the day. Like that would be, I mean, obviously that would be heartless and horrible. But I also know that it's possible that, I was just talking to somebody whose friend passed away at 49. And in addition to the grief that was certainly valid and heartfelt and hard, my friend said, this for me has been really insightful because it makes me realize that this is not a guarantee. All this time that I've been banking on to get to retirement and do all the things I've been delaying or whatever. She's like, I want to live now. And so there is that. You used a good example that for me is there's a fine line between being morbid, but also being useful. You said imagining like you might lose somebody that's close to you. And that is powerful, right? It's like one of those. Well, I'll give an example. Somebody quoted this to me, and I'm embarrassed I don't remember who it was. So if someone's listening and remembers who it is, then maybe you can let me know. Someone gave a story about how a woman used to be so upset that her husband used to eat bagels in the kitchen in a really messy way. So that, those poppy seed bagels, there'd be poppy seeds all over the counter. And she was always so mad. And she used to gripe at him, and it was all whatever. The poppy seeds were like the bane of her existence. And then he died. And then, of course, it struck her. She's like, what I would do to just have like a day of messy poppy seeds on the counter if it meant that he could come back. And so I think most of us could take that in our lives and look at the thing, whether it's not just to appreciate an annoying thing that a loved one does, but it's to say, like my dad is 87. I think I don't see him often. He's in Toronto. And I think like every time I see him, I'm like, this could be the last visit. And you know what it does? It makes me a better daughter when I'm there because I am aware that I want to savor this time with you. Let's link arms and go, go look at, your favorite thing in the park. So I think that there's value there. It's a tough line to toe, but I think it's valuable. Thanks for bringing it up.
Sure, for sure. So in your coaching work and in your own personal life, are there any questions that you found particularly impactful for helping to see what is most important in life, to clear away all the nonsense? Like, what are the questions you find are really hard hitting and just get someone there quickly?
Yeah, great question. Most of the coaching stuff I'm doing now is in through workshops and keynotes. And the conversation about deathbed regrets can help get through clutter. And I've actually, this is so funny. I flew home last night from a keynote, and I had this revelation. I was like, I think I need to stop using the word regrets, because we immediately, when we think about regrets, we go to the things we did and wished we hadn't done, i.e. mistakes. So let's just pause on regrets for a minute. And now let's just talk about paths not taken. So let's pretend you're on your deathbed and oh man, you've lived a life. Good for you. But today's the day. And now you're ending it. And I want you to reflect back on the things in life that you wanted to do, but you didn't take action on for whatever reason. No shame, no judgment. And what things would make you feel those pangs of like, oh, you always talked about it, but you never did it, honey. Or like, oh, so what would those things be? So again, it is a different kind of regret, just to get like sciencey with you. And I know you know this, like there were regrets of commission, the mistakes, oops, wished I didn't buy that house or marry that person or whatever. But then the regrets, the ones that we care about here, are the regrets of omission. And those are those coulda, shoulda, wouldas. Like, what if I had? I always wished I'd gone back to school. And meanwhile, now my answer, of course, is going to be like, you're not dead yet. You could still go back to school if you really want it. Or if like your regret, this is what's powerful, is I get everybody to write out their list of things that they might think, oh, and I go, well, those are pregrets, right? They're not regrets yet because you haven't died and you still have a chance, if it really matters to you, to go, wow, like if you really wanted to start that business, what's stopping you from starting it now? Or if you'd say, well, I really wished I'd gone back and dated more. Well, what's stopping you from getting on another app or getting a matchmaker? Or I really wish that I had started a new hobby and had the courage to play the drums. Well, what's stopping you from finding an instructor or just banging it around? Like, that's the thing, is that you get to look at this and say, if you think you would regret it if you died tonight, well, why not course correct it? And that can sometimes create a little bit of clarity for people.
Brilliant. Are there any for
Mm.
you that you think you might have a pre-regret about? Is that the right
Oh,
word?
yeah. You know, the answer is yes. I think about this a lot. And I have often, like, it's easy for me to externally do it. And like, not a lot of people are like you that ask me. So I have been thinking more lately. My regrets are more about ways of being than activities. So yeah, a couple little things like, at this point I'd be like, I never got to the south of France. Damn, I'll go. But I think I mine are about a category of regrets called boldness. So Dan Pink, writer and researcher, et cetera, he does a lot of work about regrets, and he's got different categories of regrets. And the one for me that is like blinking lights is called boldness regrets, and it's about taking risks. It's about putting yourself out there. And so it's the stuff that is, like I wish I'd taken more risks to ask for opportunities or to ask someone for help in a way where I think I was too afraid. I'm like talking like I'm dead. I was too afraid. Like I'm on my deathbed. I am often afraid about, oh, I don't want them to think badly of me. I don't want them to think I'm using them, or I don't want to bother them. Or what if they say no, like fear of rejection and failure, just such kind of human things. But at the same time, I think, oh, honey, if I was on my deathbed tonight, I'd be like, dude, you could have just put it out there more. And so this saying this with you right now, by the way, thank you for the free coaching session, is super helpful because now it's like, whatever, I'm dying. I got like 1,810, maybe less. I don't know, maybe more, I hope. But who cares? I'm just going to go for it. So as a result of our conversation, I'm going to commit to doing one thing today that makes me feel a little bit squeamish in service of, maybe helping to build some business or get this word out there.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Can I ask you the same question? Is there anything that you would feel angsty about the coulda, shoulda, woulda?
Um, I actually asked myself this. It wasn't about the deathbed, but it was like when I was 30, I was like, when I get to 40, what am I most likely to regret not having done this decade? And the honest answer
Oh,
was it would be doing my best to build a family, to start a family. That for me would be probably a big regret, I would say.
God. Well, your answer tracks to a lot of research where the number one regret that people do have, typically in hospice on their deathbeds, it does surround something having to do with the topic of family. So yeah, I love how you've put it into decades. For some reason, I feel like that makes it more doable, right? Like I'm a big fan of making bite-sized things, like even a bucket list. I think bucket lists, I'm very pro-con, the idea about capture all the things that you want to do in your life before you die. Like, great if it helps you to organize and then do these things. But back to what we were talking about earlier about positive fantasies, I actually think bucket lists are life delaying lists in disguise because it gives us just enough satisfaction to write down, I'm going to go to Prague, or I am going to, start the potato farm or like the basil garden, or I don't know, whatever the things are that might be on your bucket list. Um, yeah. But then you're like, oh, I feel good that I wrote it there. And now I'm going to close the file or I'm going to close the journal. And now I'm going to go and, put on the broccoli. When like, but have we done it? Like, did you put a date down that when you're going to do it by? So I like actually the bite size idea better where it's like, okay, what about um, like the husband and I are going to be off next week, and we have a list on our kitchen counter about the list of all things vacation. And we're not really going to go away much, but it's like little things like we want to go back to that restaurant to have that dessert, or we're going to go and check out this hike that we haven't done. And then so it's silly stuff. It's that, oh, we're going to make, we bought a new instant pot. So we're going to make our own beans for the first time in our lives. I mean, that's going to be scintillating. Like, I actually think it is. And so like, these are like, I mean, not to say that making beans is on my bucket list, but these are the bite-sized things that will make sure that in this 1 week of our lives where we had maybe a little bit of extra time for discretionary fun stuff, I would be so excited. Like that was the bean week or, whatever the thing is that we're going to do. And that makes it more doable rather than, oh my gosh, I've got this large track, hopefully of the rest of my life. Oh, yeah, Prague, it'll happen later. Oh, really? So I like your decade idea. That's cool.
Okay. Have you heard of Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence?
Oh, I love it so much. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to set it up or do you want me to? I'm happy.
Lead the way.
Okay. So he has this character in one of his book stories who comes down from the mountain and he's like, okay, I am creating a situation and this is your life now. It's that you need to live your life as you have lived it exactly from the moment you were born until this moment. All the good stuff, all the bad stuff, all the exciting stuff, all the mind-blowingly boring stuff. But you are going to live that life again and again and again until eternity, forever. And then his point, well, the character's point was this awareness will either delight you or it will crush you. And it's an indication about, yeah, my life's been good. Yeah, I squandered that, or I'm kind of embarrassed about that, but I would live this life again. Or, oh dear God, what? I'm like, this is going to be excruciating to do again and again and again because I haven't shown up for life yet. Like the best years of my life are going to come because that's when I have been delaying it. I feel like isn't the coolest thought experiment to really imagine, like if you're happy with your life now or if you've been delaying it till later, don't you think?
Totally. Totally. That's the best way I've heard that explained, actually. I've never heard someone actually give the story about coming down from the mountain and seeing it from that context. So thanks for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Hey.
Um, so in your book, and I think in your TED talk as well, you mentioned that you had some struggles with an eating disorder and bulimia in your past.
Yeah.
I was curious, did this kind of work, like this kind of contemplation, help with that at all? Or was it
Oh,
unlinked?
well, I might have. That's a really good question because so it was a 10-year battle royale. And I think that for me, I had a real purpose that I was aiming towards. That it's not that I didn't have a direction or purpose before, because I could say, well, I had different phases of my career, but I was newly enrolled in the master's program at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was going to start, I should say. So I knew I'd been accepted. And for me, that was this pivotal moment in life of like, I think it's time that I wanted to get quote unquote my acting gear. And I don't mean to imply that others with addictions don't have your acting gear. I don't mean for it to sound snooty or snarky. But I was like, I think it's time for me to work on this because I don't want to be going and studying the science of well-being while I am so internally unwell-beinged. So for me, it felt like, oh, this is a fresh start in something that matters. And, I think all of us are dealing with our own internal woes to varying degrees, right? It could just be a small inner battle, like, I don't know, pick your run of the mill body dysmorphia or whatever the small thing is, all the way up to big, 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 scary, scary, big addictions and issues. And we're just trying to cope. And sometimes having like a North Star pointed towards something that's bigger and like really matters to us, I'll be honest, for a lot of us, it can shake things and scare us and cause us to want to cope and use things like food or gambling or shopping or, fill in the blanks more. But I also think that maybe having a sense of like, you know what it was? For me, it was like, this is my path that I really want to like that sense that I'm doing a thing for me that really matters. And the stakes, are they high? I guess, but it just felt like a commitment to life in a way that was different from my usual routine of work, 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 a little bit of fun, work, work, work. This was like, I'm opening the door to the rest of the life I want to live. And it felt like it mattered more.
Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. That's really
Mm,
powerful.
thanks for asking.
Um, so in the book, you talk as well a lot about Ernest Becker and the denial of death
Mm.
and these sort of immortality projects. Can you tell us about the three types of immortality projects?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Ernest Becker is like the guru of bringing the topic to the world in modern day about how, oh yeah, we deny death. Like the denial of death, I think is his main book that he, interestingly enough, was awarded greatly for after he died. So talk about about symbolic immortality is that he was able to gain immortality in his own way after he died, notoriety at least. We like to cling to life and we like to deny the fact that we are going to die. And as I mentioned earlier, with that, like starting to talk about terror management theory, when we start to think about death, if we do it in an abstract way, our brains will just really try to protect us. And we like to engage in things that make us feel comfortable. And we do this subconsciously for the most part. This notion of symbolic immortality is this idea that if I create, for example, a project that will live beyond me, it makes me feel reassured. So for some people, it could be building a company or even building a home, building like a new division of a workspace. For some people, it's writing a book. Creating art is really one of the creation in general. Anything that, if you could often think of this, and I know that Scott Barry Kaufman does a lot of work in the world of like creativity and also linking that to this existentialism topic. Like if you are making something, unless it's a meal that is going to be eaten by the end of the night, it is something that might endure beyond you. And that creates a wee bit of comfort in ways that our rational brains just don't even have to understand. But it's this idea like, or even if I donate money to a cause and I get my name etched into like a brick on the wall of the hospital or whatnot, or the park bench in donation, loving memory of so-and-so. It's like this funny thing of like, oh, I'm going to die, but my park bench is going to be able to seat so many people. Having kids is a really big one. So that is another example. In fact, a lot of people will say that there's, it's not even symbolic. Like that one is, your kids will outlive you and hopefully still talk about you somewhat kindly after you're gone. And then they'll talk about you to some grandparents. But at some point, we're all just trying to avoid that dispiriting notion that, after probably 100 years from now, you'll be a very distant memory, or maybe you'll be somewhere on like ancestry.com or someone's family tree project. Your name will be there. But we're trying to find ways to avoid that. So.
Yeah, that's such an interesting idea. Like when you think about someone that's read a book like 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, and people still read that today, the person to some extent does live on through
Yeah.
that cultural mechanism, and that's pretty incredible, you know?
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because depending what you believe and how you're motivated and stuff, like for example, the book writing for me was not about, I want someone to see my name in X number of years. Like I just have a belief system, which is like, when I'm gone, and I'm not going to care much after I'm gone, I don't think. And so for me, it will not matter if well, it's not true. I would love it. It would be really cool if people could still be inspired by the book afterwards, but that's not why I'm doing it. But this concept of legacy is interesting because it's for all of us. Like it doesn't mean we have to create something that is a huge success and or worldwide for people to get to know you. It could be that subtle little thing about ripple effects, right? So it could be that you are a really kind and insightful person, and you then, through the way you are, because in your relationships, you can't not, like, as curious as you are and thoughtful with your questions, this is you in your social circle too, I betcha. Any of your friends and family can beg to differ, I suppose, but you then have this impact on them that impacts their day. And then, like, you're talking about possible regrets down the road, family, et cetera. Like, let's say you end up having 17 kids. Talk about symbolic immortality. But like you end up where like you listen, and then they might do that with their kids, but their experience of being with you creates an impression of their day that steers them in a different direction, that then influences the next person that they talk to at their 3:30 meeting. So this idea about echoes, I find that it really intriguing because we all know the impact of even just one person's good or bad interaction with us in a given day, how it can just slightly spin off and impact everything else because it's all just so freaking connected. So yeah, I don't think we have to start, the north wing of the library and it's have to be enduring. I think it could just be even knowing like the little things, like our values that we embody, the way we show up, the way that maybe, you're known for all these little funny anecdotes and that people talk about you and laugh. And then they talk about it at their dinner table. All that stuff just somehow stays in the system and goes beyond you,
That's
I think.
beautiful.
Mm.
Yeah, like For me, it's like, you know, that whole David Foster Wallace thing where it's like fish in water and they're like, they swim past each other and the guy's like, how's the water? And the other fish is like, what's water? And I think humans, like, we are sort of in the same thing. Like, we're all swimming in a collective, you might call it a consciousness or whatever. We're in a culture anyway that we're all contributing to. And I think the
Yeah.
contribution can be small acts, just our actions, just our state of being in the world. That creates a little ripple and that
Yeah.
spreads out. And for me, that's just worth keeping in mind that I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're doing here is we're trying to just improve that cultural soup and try and just make it a
Mhm.
bit better for the people that come after us, you know?
Yeah. I like that cultural soup. I'll have a big cup.
So in the book, you recommend quite a few practices. The one that really jumped out at me whenever I heard it was would you basically get people to ask the question, would you recommend your life? So tell me
Mm.
what you're thinking behind this question. I think it's a really powerful question.
Mm. Well, yeah, you know that business survey concept called Net Promoter Score. So it's NPS. And you'll go to a restaurant and or an experience at your dentist, and they'll send you a survey and they'll ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, like to what extent would you recommend this service to a friend? And it's a really interesting exercise that's just done even through like behavioral science. It's like to ask you, how did you like your visit at the dentist? Or how did you like your steak dinner? You're like, yeah, you might be able to assign a number from 1 to 10, but you think of it differently when you're asked if you would recommend it to a friend. Because then there's just a whole lot of other social constructs in there that get very confusing. But regardless, it's insightful. And you go, oh, so this goes back to the Nietzsche's eternal return, right? Where it's like, will I be so freaked out that I'm going to live this boring, like squandered life or whatever life again and again and again? It's similar in it's like up to the life you've lived now. And I like to actually make my question this exercise of would you recommend your life? It's like your adult life so far. I like to start it at 18 because that's when we're like generally responsible for our choices. And then from 18 till today, here's your life. It's a package and it's on the shelf and it's like right there on an end cap in the supermarket. Would you recommend, hey, guys, come over. I really recommend you buy or you live this life because yeah, there were some highs and lows, but like overall, it's a good life. And that's the sorry, a bird just flew into the window. It's incredibly morbid. I'm hoping he recovered. It was very scary, sad. Metaphoric. Um, I I if I ask myself that question, I like, and then I like back to even the way that you sliced and diced life in a way about even in decades. Like it could be, would you recommend your life so far this year? Would you recommend your life so far this decade? Maybe those are even like grabbier questions. Cause then again, like all this stuff isn't meant to then like demoralize us, be like, oh God, I've been squandering my time. Okay, maybe join. Well, first of all, like you're not alone. And also, wouldn't it be great then to now say, okay, and what ways are you feeling kind of the crappiest about? Or what ways are you actually feeling super excited and you want to do more of it? But we're all at the ability any given moment to redesign. And that's to me what the moral of this story is like, yeah, death's coming, but we have so much agency and ability to make our lives wide and deep. And so why not pay attention to those things? Like if you knew you'd recommend these things, do more of them. If you knew you'd feel a little bit awkward about, I spent, 98 out of 100 nights on the couch and that's not your version of a good life, then maybe that's your opportunity is to say, okay, well, maybe one more night a week, I'll get up and do something, that's not Netflix.
For sure, for sure. So in the book, you also recommend other practices like visiting a graveyard, writing your own obituary, which I've done, really powerful, carrying
Mm-hmm.
a memento mori coin just to sort of always keep it top of mind, which I really
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing, so you're big on calculating your remaining number of Mondays. How
Mm-hmm.
can I do that in a quick, simple way? Like, what's the quickest way to do that, would you say?
Quickest way. Well, if you really hate math, on my website, there's just a simple calculator on the resource page. So there's 4000mondays.com. You could just plug it in. But if you are not totally opposed to your calculator, if you are a male, you could start with 78 minus your age and then multiply that by 52. And if you identify as female, you would start with 83 minus your age and then multiplied by 52. And if you don't identify with either gender, just average at 80 and minus your age and multiply by 52. And that's the number of Mondays that you have left to go.
Fantastic. So before we start recording, I know you've got to go in a few minutes, so this is probably the last question. Before we started recording, I mentioned that reading your book inspired me to return to Toastmasters again and learn public speaking. So I want to say thank you for that. Um, Now, I was at a meeting last night actually, and a girl read out a poem. I'm going to read it out here just so because it's relevant to our conversation. Okay,
Great.
so it's about a river. Okay, so it is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has traveled from the peaks of the mountains. The long winding road crosses forests and villages, and in front of her she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean because only then will fear disappear. Because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. So my question here and where this kind of links in is like, have you thought much about, and maybe you haven't, but I was curious, have you thought much about after? What
Mm,
the big one, what do you
yeah.
think happens after?
Yeah. Well, okay, I'll answer research first. 60% of people believe in an afterlife of some sort. And I am firmly undecided, which sounds like a very cop-out answer. My leaning is a little bit of a that's it. And I might do that on purpose, to be honest, because just the belief structure I have, which is like make the most of this time. But maybe I am being very protective of this life. And I'm deciding to make the most of this one because I don't want to delay. My inclination might be to delay and be like, you know what? If this life is like a 7.1 out of 10, I'll just make the next one better. Maybe I don't want to do that, or however this is going to work. So I feel like I want to pay attention to this deadline, and I'm gonna choose to say, that's it. That's all. I will probably haunt some people just for fun, from a spirit point of view, if that's possible, for jokes and practical jokes. But I do think that this is our go. We may come back around again, but as far as we know, this is our go. And so that's why I say, like, you only die once, like at least in this life.
For sure, for sure. Well, Jodi, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed your book. It's You Only Die Once. Where can people find you online? Where would you recommend people to get the book as well?
Well, I appreciate you asking. At 4000mondays.com is where the other resources there, and book is there too. But and I'm on Instagram at 4000mondays too.
Thank you, Jodi.
Thank you. I love this conversation with you.